The glue is set, and so now I'm trying to cut the ends of the tenons and wedges as flush to the stretchers as possible. I'm using a flush cut saw where the teeth are only set to one side, and this should minimize the scratching in the finished surface. And just to help me along, I put some wide masking tape on here to further protect the surface. Using the flush cut saw, I cut off the majority of the tenon and wedges. You can see a little piece here, tenon and wedge assembly. But now I'm going to smooth the ends of the tenons flush with the stretchers using a block plane sharpened to 8,000 grit on a waterstone. I've already planed the top. It's very smooth, and now I'm working on the bottom set of tenons. What you see here are the cross stretchers that go between the tops of the legs on each end of the sideboard, and the top of the sideboard is attached to these. Now, because the top of the sideboard is solid wood, it's going to want to move slightly in width from season to season. So I've gone and done the calculations for how much movement we could expect, and I'm now drilling holes through which screws can come up through the bottom of these stretchers into the top, and the holes are wide enough to allow a little bit of shifting, a little bit of flexure in the screws, in the holes, so that the top can move the slight amount that it does seasonally. I've drilled the holes in the short stretchers that go between the tops of the legs, and I wanted to spend a little time explaining this a little better. The top is going to be able to expand and contract a slight amount as the seasons change and the wood absorbs or gives off moisture. So the screws that hold the top down to the leg assembly have to have a little bit of wiggle room as well. So I went ahead, and maybe you can see this little diagram, I cut a 3/8 inch deep countersink hole that the head of the pan head screw can fit into, and that's 13/16 inch deep, and then the hole next down to 3/16, which is the diameter of the shank of the screw, for about a 1/2 inch, and then the rest of the hole is a 1/4 inch diameter, and I actually reamed out the top of that hole a little bit with this tapered reamer, as you can see here, and the purpose of that is to allow the screw to wiggle a little bit. So here's how it'll work. The screw will go on up into the hole. The countersink the pan head will go into the countersink. The screw will come out the top of the hole, and you can see there's a little extra room here. The screw can wiggle a little bit, and that'll allow the top to expand and contract. Now, there's a total of 4 screws holding the top down on each end of the sideboard. The center 2 holes don't have that extra wide 1/4 inch hole because there's so little movement between the center 2 inches of the top. So those screws just fit straight on up through the countersinks and through a 3/16 inch hole. The 4 legs are attached to the stretcher assembly with very robust mortise and tenon joints. But my experience is that over the years, mortise and tenon joints can loosen up. I really don't expect it in this piece, but just to safeguard against that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and drill 1/4 inch holes, one through the center of each tenon, essentially. Through the leg, it'll go through the tenon, and put a 1/4 inch piece of cherry dowel into each of those holes. And right now I'm drilling the holes into the legs. Once the legs are assembled, those holes will be my guides for continuing the hole into the actual tenon. That would be after the glue up. It's time to shape the legs, which is the final operation before gluing them to the stretcher assembly. And so I'll start by cutting, using the bandsaw, a shallow curve along the leg, and I'll follow that up by using the spoke shave and so forth to smooth the leg. The bandsaw cut has been made, the first cut, and here's the waste piece. I'm going to save this waste piece so later on I can tape it back on and have a nice flat surface for making the cuts on the other sides. But right now I'm going to go ahead and smooth up the bandsaw marks using a spoke shave. This is a flat sole spoke shave that I just sharpened up. Very easy. Just pull along, take off all the high spots, and end up with a nice smooth surface. Now I've finished smoothing the first surface, so now I'm going to use that as a pattern to trace the curve onto the other legs that use the same curve. Very efficient use of resources. There we go. Now I can bandsaw that cut. I've used blue painter's tape to tape that waste piece that I just cut off back on here so I have a nice flat surface for cutting this next curve on the bandsaw. And here's the four legs all shaped on the bandsaw and ready now for some spoke shaving, sanding, and finishing. The legs have been shaped and finished. Now it's time to glue them on to the stretcher assembly. I've got everything assembled just like I did for the last glue up, and now I'm going to get to work. The legs are glued onto the stretcher assembly, and you remember I drilled holes in the legs so that I could put 1/4-inch cherry dowels to help strengthen the mortise, kind of lock the mortise and tenon. I'm going to go ahead now that I'm all glued up, drill a hole through the tenon, and to get into this tight space I'm using a right angle drive on my electric drill, 1/4-inch drill bit, a right angle drive, and I turn the drill on and I can get into tight spaces this way. Be careful to get this drill into the existing hole and not enlarge it any. Now to insert the dowels, I'm simply going to take a small steel rod, coat it with a little bit of glue, and go ahead and glue the inside of the hole. wipe off any excess. I'm not going to bother gluing the dowel. I've tapered, or excuse me, put a little chamfer on the very end of the dowel so it'll go into the hole easily. But no need to glue it. It'll fit nice and tightly, as you can see. And I left the dowel long so I can then cut it off with a flush trim saw. This is the completed stretcher and leg assembly. I've added the top short stretchers for holding the top in place, and if I can get close enough you can see possibly that I have pegged those stretchers in place with 1/4-inch dowels to ensure that they never loosen up, and I think it turned out very nicely. I think you can maybe get a good look here at the wedged mortise and tenons on the curved front. And I'd like to point out that the grain match, I don't know if you could see it well in previous shots, but I've tried to make the grain very harmonious throughout the piece, including the grain on the legs. If you take a close look at these legs, I think you can maybe see where the grain flares out at the top. That's to accentuate the curve of the legs, and when the top is on there, it'll be a natural curve with the bevel on the bottom of the front, sides, and back of the top. So this turned out very nicely, and it's a piece of furniture in itself. I think it's finished all throughout. Everywhere you look, there's nothing hidden in this piece, and I think that's what that's why I do furniture, to be able to make pieces like this.